Well, spring training has officially come and gone. We're going to discuss the last spring training game, spring training as a whole, and then obviously talk about this finalized roster as the bullpen battle has been settled. We'll talk about all of that today on Locked On Tigers.
You are Locked On Tigers, your daily Detroit Tigers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Tigers. I'm, of course, your host, Scott Bentley. Today is Wednesday, March 27th, 2024. Thank you so much for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off of your first purchase. Happy Wednesday to all, the halfway point in the week. I feel like I said my cold open with a different cadence than I usually do, and it really just threw me off. I hope it didn't throw anybody else off either, but I feel like this is like weird. Like I'm not going to redo it though. So we have a lot to discuss. We got to get right into it. We have the bullpen battle that was settled. Obviously, that is what we will start the show on. Joey Wentz and Alex Faedo both making the opening day roster. Then we're going to discuss the final roster as a whole. Now that the 26 players, it's set in stone and they are in Chicago as you're listening to this. So it is finalized. And then we're going to put a bow on spring training, talk about the last game and just spring training thoughts as a whole as we get our eyes set on the regular season. That is tomorrow as you're listening to this. Super, super fun. So let's start off by talking about this bullpen battle. Joey Wentz and Alex Faedo both make the Detroit Tigers opening day roster, which is a surprise to me. It was a surprise to a lot of people. I was obviously very wrong on this one as well, this and the Manning situation. Brieske is the odd man out, and he is optioned to AAA Toledo. This also implies that Miguel Diaz is out of options and will not be on the Major League team, which means that he will be put on waivers because he is out of options. And if he clears waivers, then he will have the choice of either rejoining the Tiger system, presumably going to AAA and staying in the org, or becoming a free agent. But I think there's a decent chance that he gets claimed anyway. So we will keep an eye on that situation going forward. But yeah, and then Will Vest, obviously that means that he made the opening day roster. He will be in Chicago. Will Vest, we've talked about it a few times. He always has rough spring trainings. He's a proven the last 2 years, and especially last year, proven, sub-3 ERA for a large majority of last season as well. Proven regular season reliever, even though the last 4 spring trainings, he has completely imploded. So maybe he's just not a good spring training pitcher. Maybe he just tries out new stuff in spring. He is one of the many reasons we point to as to why you can't take a ton of stock in spring training numbers all the time. Okay, so Will Vest will be on this team. Not mad about it at all. Fully expected him to be. Miguel Diaz, just no room, unfortunately. I hope more than anything he clears waivers and stays in the organization. I really do. I love Miguel Diaz. I don't think he will. I think he probably does get claimed. I think that in a perfect world, he can develop some sort of horizontal pitch, something with spin, maybe a slider, curveball, something that he has one, but a little bit more effective of one. But got a solid fastball and a really nice changeup. And if he doesn't stay in the organization, some other organization will give him a chance, I'm sure. So that leaves us with Wentz, Faedo, and Brieske, which is kind of what everybody pinned as the bullpen battle for two of those. The last 2 spots we're going to go to 2 of those 3 gentlemen. Joey Wentz making the roster is not a surprise to me. He's been pegged on as making the roster on our roster projections here for 4 weeks back in February when we did roster projection 1.0. The presumption was just because he was out of options. We've been talking about that for a while. He did have a better spring. I know some people just are like, oh my goodness, he was so bad last year. How can we justify this? This is so ridiculous, etc. A lot of stuff going around on social media. he did objectively look better in spring training, did give up home runs as the spring went along. The big question is just going to continue to be how effective is his fastball. And I do not think that if he has a 6 ERA out of the bullpen, that he's going to last all season like he did last year. I think that this is a case where they're going to keep him up. They're going to try it. I also think that Hinch and Harris, Hinch, I believe, mentioned it at some point, but having 3 lefties in the bullpen, I think is something that this organization looked at and was in favor of. And I think that that probably went into the decision-making as well. But the big question is just going to be how good is his fastball? If he has a even decent, even a major league average fastball, he can be a solid lefty, long middle inning reliever. If he doesn't, then he's not going to be on the team come the All-Star break or the end of the season, right? He won't last another year with 6+ ERA ball. This is kind of the prove it moment for Joey Wentz with the move to the pen, the uptick in velocity that comes with the move to the pen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Faedo. I am so happy for Alex Faedo. So beyond happy. He looked absolutely incredible this spring. The slider has always been really, really, really freaking good for Alex Faedo. It was his bread and butter back at Florida, one of the best college baseball rotations of my lifetime. Obviously, was one of the reasons why he was a first-round pick for the Detroit Tigers. And it was the other pitches that were needing improvement. And that has been the story for the last several seasons. And there's been moves to the bullpen and then back in the rotation and bullpen and back and forth and back and forth. And I'm just really glad that he is going to be a reliever. He's going to be a multi-inning reliever, can obviously give you multiple innings. That's something that Hinch values a lot as well. But this spring, his fastball and his changeup have looked absolutely significantly improved. The changeup specifically has looked phenomenal. And I think that that is why he is getting the nod here. This is not just the Alex Faedo of old, at least from what we saw in the spring, of this is a slider and if, he's just going to throw the slider a lot and that's pretty much it. He has developed 3, again, based on what we saw in the spring, legitimate pitches, with the slider still obviously being the best one, but that is an incredible winter that he had, an incredible spring training that he had, and I do not want lost in this decision, controversial, loud, whatever word you want to use, the decision that is having Wentz and Faedo up here. I don't want it to be lost that Alex Faedo absolutely deserved this. And I've been saying for weeks on this show, in a perfect world, I would have Alex Faedo on my major league roster, right? The last 3 or 4 times we've had this conversation, that's been my exact quote. But I didn't think that it was possible for Faedo, Wentz, and Brieske to all be on the roster, and I thought Faedo would be the odd man out. Turns out, they were impressed by Faedo's spring as well, and Brieske is the odd man out, and that leaves us with the conversation surrounding Beau Brieske. The fastball looks great. Was touching 98, right? Pumping absolute heat since moving into the bullpen. Can throw a 97+ mile an hour fastball. It is a really, really, really effective and good pitch, obviously. The changeup has been something that ever since he was in Double-A and we first started hearing about him, he came on this show a few years ago when he was still in the minors. That changeup has been his best secondary offering and has been a plus pitch for a while. They are still looking for him to develop a horizontal, spinny breaking pitch. And it's the slider, most likely. It's going to be the slider. It just continues to look not nearly as effective as the other 2 pitches in his repertoire. Depth is a beautiful thing. We will see plenty of Beau Brieske this season, as we said about Matt Manning. And this dude had a 0 ERA, right? That's 2 years in a row that there's been a pitcher with a 0 ERA that has got sent down to AAA to start off the season. Miguel Diaz notoriously had a 0 ERA last spring and didn't make the opening day roster. So this is not, he's not being exiled. It doesn't even mean he did anything wrong. Again, similar to Matt Manning, this is just a team that has legitimate pitching depth now. And they can afford, I'm going to use the word afford, I think that's probably fair, to send a guy that looked as good as Brieske did this spring down to AAA and have him tinker and work on some extra stuff, being the slider most likely, And then when that is perfected, or if there's just an injury, etc., then he can be on the call to come back up. Beau Brieske may pitch like 40 plus innings out of this bullpen, right? Like, just because he's not on the opening day roster does not mean that he really anything other than the first few weeks of the season, he's not going to be on the team. I fully expect to see a lot of Beau Brieske. I was very impressed with what I saw from him this spring. Again, I fully expected him to make the major league roster, but this is again a sign of depth and what we need to see from him in AAA to be able to reestablish himself and kind of re-break through at the major league level is some continued development on his slider. Okay, and again, there's stuff that Faedo can still work on. There's stuff that Vest can still work on. There's certainly plenty that Joey Wentz can still work on. That's not to say that the people that made it over him are just finished products, but I think that is probably the biggest decision going into it. Fastball, changeup, kind of need something that goes side to side if you're coming out of the bullpen. Okay, cool. And need is, I guess, a stretch. Again, I thought he was going to make the team. Okay, let's continue this conversation. Keep the ball rolling. Let's talk final roster. Okay, let's kind of break it down, lay out the 26 names, and then talk about just general kind of thoughts as we see these names laid out in front of us. All right, we'll do all of that right after this. Got to talk to y'all today about our friends over at Prize Picks. Look, football season may be over, but the action on the floor is hot as ever. It's tournament season, and it's the fight for playoff home court in the NBA, so there's no shortage of high-stakes basketball moments this time of year. So get in on all the excitement with Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app, where you can turn your hoops knowledge into serious cash. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can now turn $10 into $1,000 with NBA, NHL, and college basketball entries today on Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. You pick more or less on certain stats for certain players. Yesterday, we talked a lot about, I think we mentioned Bradley Beal, talking about his points, right? That's something that team this year is just a talking point night in and night out. The Pelicans are playing really good ball lately. Zion really in his bag. A lot of players on that team that I think you could take a look at as well. It's just really fun and really easy to use. So be sure to download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, it's LOCKEDONMLB. First deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Segment 2 of Locked on Tigers. Appreciate you all for tuning in, making us your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. We will be back tomorrow with our season preview episode. Also, be sure to check out Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the best and biggest stories without all the screaming that maybe Fox or ESPN gives you on a day-to-day basis. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or for free in the Amazon Fire TV channels app. Okay, so let's talk about this roster. Let's go through it. The 26 men that will be playing not necessarily playing, but in the dugout, rather. On opening day, tomorrow in Chicago, will be at catcher, Jake Rogers, and obviously Carson Kelly. First base, Spencer Torkelson. Second base, Colt Keith. Shortstop, Javi Baez. Third base, Gio Urshela. We'll put him there just for the sake of this exercise. Outfield, Riley Green, Parker Meadows, and Mark Canha, with Kerry Carpenter as well. Matt Vierling, Andy Ibanez, and Zach McKinstry make up your bench of utility players that can play kind of all around the diamond, if you will. The rotation, Tarek Skubal, Kenta Maeda, Jack Flaherty, Reese Olson, and Casey Mize. In the bullpen, Alex Lang, Jason Foley, Shelby Miller, Andrew Chafin, Will Vest, Tyler Holton, Alex Faedo, and Joey Wentz. I think it's important to note that if there is an injury in the infield early on in the season, Ryan Kreidler will almost assuredly be the first call-up. If there's an injury in the outfield early in the season, Akil Baddoo is presumably going to be the first call-up. In the rotation, it's obviously Matt Manning. And in the bullpen, I think it's probably Beau Brieske. Again, maybe Miguel Diaz clears waivers and stays in the system, but then, they'd have to re-put him onto the 40-man, et cetera, et cetera. I think Briske's probably the safer bet. So that's kind of the first four call-ups early on. Now, obviously, as the season goes along, then it's performance-based, right? But if something happens in April, I'd be surprised if they went out of those four. My initial thoughts, and again, we'll do our full season preview tomorrow. I think the rotation I'm pretty optimistic. I think a lot of people, especially after spring training, are becoming more and more optimistic about this rotation. Tarek Skubal, obviously, everybody talks about the ceiling for him being kind of Cy Young candidate, but everybody else is really where I think the rotation of the optimist goodness. Everyone else, I think, is where the conversation involving the optimism around the rotation kind of lies, right? Kenta Maeda is somebody that, especially as the spring went along, got more and more swings and misses. The splitter looked really good. I think also Jack Flaherty hitting 95 miles an hour with that fastball is getting a lot of people pretty optimistic about what we could see out of him. Casey Mize, we'll talk about him in his last spring training outing on Tuesday, but just as a whole, seeing the velo up, seeing just not injured, no restrictions. Casey Mize out there has been phenomenal. Reese Olson obviously has nasty stuff, right? We all are very well aware of what Tarek Skubal is going to do if he is healthy, and assuming he is healthy. It's the other four that are going to determine the ceiling and floor, I guess, really, which is not great analysis. I'm realizing that, they're going to determine everything. Well, they are going to kind of determine everything, right? This is there's still a lot of question marks surrounding some of these guys. Is that velocity going to hold throughout the whole year for Flaherty? How many innings are we going to get from most of these guys is really a pretty massive question mark for all five of them, really. You can throw Manning in there, just everybody. How many innings are we going to get out of everybody? So that's something that I think, again, a lot of people are pretty optimistic about the rotation early on in the year, myself included. And I think that they have every right to be. There was a lot of good that happened in spring training on the pitching side of things. And that transitions us to the bullpen. I think I'm very, very optimistic about this bullpen as well. I do have serious questions about who is going to be the bona fide ninth inning guy. I'm not sure that's really 100% established. I guess I'm slightly just leaning Lang just because, but last time I leaned a certain direction just because it was Manning and Brieske. So I'm not sure that's really advice that we should be taking, but I think that I saw enough from Lang, at least in the spring, to early on put him in high leverage opportunities at a minimum and see if maybe he can work himself back into ninth or just give him the ninth. We'll see what happens. But I think that is really my only question out of the bullpen. Outside of that, this is a very deep, very talented, plenty of lefties, plenty of obviously then righties. Like this is a potential to be a really solid arm barn for the Detroit Tigers. And then that leaves us with offense and defense. I think there's still some question marks surrounding the defense, but it's certainly improved from a year ago, for whatever that's worth. Obviously, the addition of Parker Meadows in center field is a huge reason as to why people are optimistic about the defense, at least more than they were. Riley Green to the corners, that gives you a great look. He will almost assuredly be a positive defender in corner outfield. Kerry Carpenter not being in the field necessarily as much. Hopefully Torkelson cannot be one of the worst defensive first basemen in baseball. But I do think that there is some, you don't have the black hole at third base that like four different guys that played third last year and were terrible defenders are all gone. I think that the defense should be marginally improved from a year ago. And that leaves us with the offense. There's still very legitimate question marks. I think that the biggest talking points with this offense, spoiler alert, no surprise to anybody, is going to be Riley Green and Spencer Torkelson. If those two take a step forward and are legitimate middle of the lineup threats on a major league roster, then this offense has, the ceiling for this offense goes up significantly. But even outside of those two, right? Colt Keith and Parker Meadows, first full seasons in the majors. How much production do we get out of them? Even the new additions, Mark Canha, Gio Urshela. How integral parts of this offense will they be? That's a big question. And then even some guys that did really well in spring training that are making adjustments or maybe weren't awesome last year and were kind of like, okay, well, that was a good spring. Let's see if you can do it in the regular season. Carson Kelly, Matt Vierling kind of fall into that category. There's just a ton of question marks still on the offense, and some will hit and some won't. And that's why they play the games, baby. But that is, I think, going to be as far as this team will go as far as the offense allows it to. And that's not a surprise to anybody. I don't think that's a new or very original take. We'll talk about that a lot more tomorrow on the season preview. But yeah, I think that there is a lot of reasons to be excited with this roster, and there's still a lot of question marks with this roster. And that makes for a really, really exciting but nerve-wracking, kind of get butterflies type of season that we have in store for us. All right, let's wrap up. We'll put a bow on spring training. We'll do all of that right after this. Got to talk to y'all today about our friends over at Game Time. Game Time is the definition of clutch. They're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. They have deals on tickets right up to the start of an event, even an hour and a half after the event starts. It's the place to find last-minute seats. I know it's my favorite place to find last-minute seats, certainly, mostly because I usually do my purchasing of tickets at the last minute. So Game Time is definitely the app for me. You can find exclusive flash deals on sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. With zone deals, you can pick the section that in Game Time will pick the seats for big time savings. They also have the Game Time guarantee. It means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So download Game Time today, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Alrighty, everybody, welcome back here. Third and final segment of Locked On Tigers. Appreciate y'all for tuning in. We have almost made it to opening day, and that means we can put spring training officially in the rearview mirror. We'll talk about spring training one final time, and then thank goodness, never again. Spring training is really exciting early, but as it goes along, it's like, oh my goodness, this is all we have to talk about, so we have to talk about it. But these games don't matter. And we've said it before, like Nick Maton had 1,000 OPS last spring. Like at the end of the day, the regular season games are the ones that count and that tell you the most information about a player. At no point ever has spring training been more telling about someone than a regular season ball game. And I'm just so thankful and happy that we have made it past another spring, and tomorrow we play regular season baseball. Tigers end spring training 29-4. That is not 29-4. That is 20-9-4 ties because it is spring training. That is, I believe, the second best record in the Grapefruit League of all the Florida teams. I think the Orioles only had like 6 losses all spring training. So, yeah, one of the better teams in spring for whatever that is worth to you. In this final game, they tied the Rays 3-3. Shout out Chris Myers, man. Hit a home run in this ball game. 13th round draft pick from a few years back. Good to see him get some time getting at bat and immediately hit a home run. That's kind of cool. So good for him. We'll see where he starts off this season. But honestly, a lot of the opening day offensive players went over. This was not a fantastic offensive performance to go out on. I think a lot of guys probably just have their eyes set ahead and aren't putting a ton of effort into the final spring training game. But I'm also not in that room. I don't know that to be the case necessarily. But I hope that it is, because like everybody, Colt Keith had a hit. Javi Baez had a hit. Outside of that, not a single opening day player on the position player side of things is going into opening day with having reached base and lodged a hit there in the final spring training game. Torkelson over 3 with 3 Ks. Probably not the way he wanted to go out there. Gary Carpenter 0 for 3 with 2 Ks. yeah, could have certainly been a lot better, I guess. But again, spring training, I'm looking way more forward to just regular season baseball. And if some of these guys get off to slow starts, then we'll have that conversation. Casey Mize pitched in this ball game. He looked really solid, or at least he sounded like he looked really solid. But 5 innings, 2 hits, 1 earned run, no walks, and 6 strikeouts. One of the 2 hits he gave up was a home run, a solo shot. The fastball averaged 95 miles an hour. That's something we've talked about a lot and is absolutely awesome and is a great sign for the regular season. The breaking stuff in this game, it looks like played really well. This game was not televised. I have no clue, but he threw the slider a boatload. I believe it was his second most thrown pitch, and it was also super effective. A lot of called strikes, a lot of swinging missed strikes. The velocity on it was up than what we were used to before his surgeries. Great sign, right? That because we know the fastball now. We know that the fastball has the ability to get into the mid and upper 90s. We also know that he has that splitter that's going to act as kind of the vertical drop pitch, the changeup-esque type of thing he has going on, effective pitch when it's on. The question mark I've had for the last few starts is, okay, we've seen the velo. Let's see something that spins. Let's see something side to side. And he had a really effective kind of under the radar breaking repertoire pre-Tommy John. And so seeing an outing where he just threw the heck out of the slider and it worked for him, I think is a fantastic sign going into this season. 6 Ks in 5 innings. Again, just absolutely awesome stuff. The bullpen was solid as well. Foley pitched in this game. Tyler Holton, Shelby Miller did give up a home run as well. But yeah, as far as players that are going to be on the Major League roster on opening day, pretty sound performance from all of them as well. So let's end by talking about just putting a bow on spring training, if you will. My biggest takeaway from spring is, man, I really just want to say spring training just doesn't matter. But that's too dramatic. That's too far on the opposite end, right? The pendulum has swung too far to just say it doesn't matter. Excuse me. I do think that win-loss record doesn't matter too much to me. I would much prefer them winning than losing. Don't get me wrong. I think that's a great sign, and I would much rather they get used to winning than the alternative. But that doesn't really, I'm much more process-based and whatnot in spring, especially. Baseball in general is kind of like that. But I think that the biggest takeaway has to be how good the pitching looked. Pitching coaches deserve a boatload of credit. We talk about all the time, Feder, Lund, and Nieves. The velocity from everybody just seemed to be up. The stuff from so many players, Flaherty's slider, obviously anything Skubal throws. Casey Mize, we just talked about his slider. Kenta Maeda is a veteran, hasn't been here, but his stuff looks solid. Obviously, Reese Olson. Matt Manning didn't make the cut, but his stuff looks completely different than it's looked in the past. You go through the bullpen, similar conversations, right? It's just really, really easily the biggest thing that jumped out at me this spring training was how good the pitching looks so far. There's offensive question marks coming out of spring training for sure, as we talked about earlier. But to be honest, I don't think those were ever going away in spring training, right? Even if, Torkelson had a 1,200 OPS and everybody was crushing the ball and we had the best offense in all of baseball in spring training. Would anybody really have gone into the regular season and be like, this offense is going to be one of the best offenses in baseball? Like, no, right? Like you still would have had your questions and your, hesitant on a couple of players, and just like this offense has been so bad for the last 3 years, 2 years specifically. It's been so rough that spring training wasn't going to take those question marks away. So for whatever it is worth, there are some individual players I think that people are optimistic about after spring training. But another one of the biggest things is just no injuries, and I don't even really want to talk about it. Let's move on. Too superstitious to even really spend too much time on this, but it's nice to see that injury report be very, very small. More than anything, and this is what we'll end on, just looks like a vast majority of the team just looks so ready for regular season baseball. That's might be my biggest takeaway, is everybody just looks ready. The pitching looks ready. We learned a lot about how much pitching depth this organization actually has in the spring. That is something that we knew, but was kind of reaffirmed, if not swung the other way. It was like, wow, we might even have more than we thought. There was more in-camp competitions than we've had in a very long time. Obviously, third base, but in the rotation, 3 legitimate major league caliber starters fighting for 2 spots. In the bullpen, 3 or 4 legitimate major league caliber relievers fighting for 2 or 3 spots, depending on, who you're grouping in together. I think that's healthy. That's good. It's good to have in-camp competitions. It's good to have spring mean something. That's good, because as I started off with this, it doesn't a lot of times. So it's really good when you can manufacture that. You can manufacture competition. You can make it mean something off rip. And that's when you come in and on, in February, and you see guys that have already been throwing for 2.5 months and their velo is up 2 miles an hour. That's what the Tigers did this spring. And that is freaking awesome. Really almost just dropped an F-bomb there. That was close. That's absolutely incredible. So I'll end on this. To put a bow on spring training, they look ready. That's my takeaway from the end of spring. I just said that's my takeaway to like 6 different things, but you get my point. They look ready. And that doesn't mean that everybody had a great spring, right? Does Javi look any different than last year? No. Did Torkelson have a rough spring? Absolutely, right? But they look ready to roll, especially the pitching. But everybody, I really do think that is my, to put a bow on spring training, especially the last week or so. I think everybody's just ready to start the season. And so am I. Thanks for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. We will be back tomorrow with a season preview. We made it. Peace and love. Going to therapy's dope. I'll catch y'all then, baby. Go Tigers.